There is a fifth dimension.
About the unknown.
Beyond that which is known to man.
The Garden of Thought.
The Babylon Project was our last best hope for peace.
Unexplained.
Mythologies.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
The Garden of Thought with Jeff Lippman.
Eventually, our sun will grow cold and go out.
You're listening to something much bigger, something hidden in plain sight.
It won't just take us. It'll take Marilyn Monroe and Lao Tzu and Einstein. All of us was for nothing unless we go to the stars.
What you're about to learn will completely change the way you experience your mind, your thoughts, and yourself.
And to make sure that history never forgets the name.
The Garden of Thought.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Thought, and we're very excited to have one of our favorite returning guests on, Professor Jon F. White from Crecganford. Magical and wonderful, actually not so much magical, a fact and academic based YouTube channel that talks about myths and the distinction between myths and folklore and legends, and isn't necessarily seeking to find the commonalities, but actually a much bigger mission of building a mythology database and all sorts of things like that. But the good professor can tell you far better than I can about it. And if you haven't heard his prior shows on this podcast, well, go ahead and do so. There's probably about 5 of them. And if you haven't subscribed to his YouTube channel, you should probably do that too as well. And if you have a few bucks, you can consider being a patron. I don't think you have cool merch yet, but you might have some. I know you have coffee mugs.
Coffee mugs.
Yeah. Which is, honestly, an extra coffee mug is much more essential than an extra t-shirt for most people. Anyway, welcome, John. Thank you for young John.
Yes, young Jeff. How do you do?
Yes. One of the reasons that John is one of my favorite guests is that I have been on or around his live streams a few times, sometimes lurking and sometimes actually participating, and he always refers to me as young Jeff, and I think it's funny because we are within months of each other the same age. So I am not just young Jeff, he is young John. We're very young, but neither one of us will confirm nor deny that we were ever part of Robin Hood's Band of Merry Men. So tell me a little bit about yourself, and then I'll get into some extraneous business, and then we'll talk about what we're talking about today on this show.
Oh, okay, Jeff. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I study predominantly mythology, focusing on what we consider Indo European mythology, but I do end up travelling around the world through Siberia into the Americas and elsewhere, trying to get into Africa where I can, but there's just so much to learn. It's a difficult task. And as part of that journey, I have created a repository of data of narratives that people can use to understand the origins and social sciences around our ancestors. And I'll try and tell high quality, academically rigorous narratives at least once a month on YouTube. I could try and, it's difficult to do more because it requires a lot of research, and I'm not really one to use AI to develop scripts.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like your style.
It's not my cup of tea, and I get quite irked by people who do that. Although I would correct you, you suggested I was magical and then took that back at the intro. In my earlier years, I was a semi-professional magician.
Oh,
so
well,
I can perform magic.
Apology, Magister. Yes.
Yes.
So, folks, we are recording this on March 1st of 2026 for a date stamp, and we are in like day 2.5 of the United States and Israel attacking Iran. I don't know if I should call it war or not, but I mean, it's hard to distinguish what a war is and isn't these days. Yes, it's sort of like one of those things. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck, and there's going to be a lot of talk and debate about international law and illegality, and then internally and externally, I'm sure. As is often the case when there's a major news item, I have trouble sleeping the night before, and I found Sky News on my TV, which I'm not really sure how that happened, but it was interesting to hear an almost exclusive British perspective on it with British officials and what they were saying. In any event, I don't really mean to get into the details of it. I just don't want anyone to think that I'm ignoring that, but that is not the remit of this show. However, it was a couple of episodes, sort of, when I had a former member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps on the show. So if you want to get some insight and perspective on the Quds Force and sort of intra-Iran and some of the politics from someone who is clearly not a professional storyteller, but has a memoir out so you can read it and judge for yourself their credibility and their experiences, it might be an interesting listen to. Now, I listen to myself at 2x speed. I recommend to you at 1x speed because that guest is also a slow talker and I'm a slow talker. But it is a shameless plug, but it was timely at the time, and it may be insightful. This show goes in lots of different directions, and believe me, I was not expecting that. In any case, today's show is nothing to do with that, except for the fact that Jon is a professor of Indo European, and Indo European, of course, includes Persia and many of the other cultures around that, and the Iranians also went north into what you might call Ukraine and Russia, and then west into some of the stands. I'm sorry, east into the stands. Of course, they went west. Probably more. I'm not really great on that the geography, but maybe more Kazakhstan than say Uzbekistan. But anyway, that's not important either, because it might be. But today the topic is the myths of Siberia and how they sort of made their way across the strait into the Americas. And I will, at the beginning, tell you sort of what I expect to hear. I expect to hear some familiar themes from some of our favorite mythologies, and also some of what we've heard from the First Nations, Canada, the Native Americans, from the United States, and then I don't even know what the right word is in Mexico and South America, but some of the stories there, and maybe a slow and steady mishmash of sort of compromises that maybe ends up like Shintoism. I don't know. But anyway, I always say anyway. I need to have a dollar jar where I just pay $1 to somebody else every time I say anyway, because if I just have one I pay myself, that's not productive. We have an expert here. So Jon, please save the audience from me. Take it away.
Okay, so as part of my studies in mythology, we try and find out where stories come from. And it wasn't too long ago in our past that some anthropologists were starting to realise there were some connections between stories in North America, First Nation tribes, and those of some of the Siberians and Asian cultures. And that was a bit weird, but it would make sense that if people had migrated from Asia and Siberia to the Americas, did they take stories with them? And if they did that, when did that happen? Because the only evidence we find is that those migrations happened initially between 25 and 14,000 years ago, when we were having a bit of a cold spell, you would call it, and there's lots of ice everywhere up north. allow in the Bering Strait or Beringia to be formed, which probably helped guide people into the Americas. Whether they use that or use the sea is set up for debate. And then, interestingly, about 5,000 years ago, we see what we would consider Inuit populations travel from Siberia into Canada and across Canada. So we see these migrations. So if we're saying there are stories from Siberian Asia in the Americas, could they be sort of as old as 25,000 years old? So where do we start? Because that's quite a claim if you're not aware of what I do. So one of the really interesting things we found, which isn't mythological, is archaeology, because we always like to use archaeology and linguistic evolution to help back up any claims. And there was a discovery of a burial called Anzik, I think it's called, and there was a child buried in a particular way in a grave with some grave goods. Now, as part of ritual and myth, you would normally bury someone in a specific way with grave goods. Then you know something is going on. You're not just throwing a body away. You're doing something very deliberate. You have to deliberately dug the pit. You have to deliberately dug the pit,
right.
And then deliberately place them in the pit in a particular way, and then deliberately place some of their items with them in this pit. And so there's this Anzik burial in North America. And you say, well, what's that got to do with Siberia? Well, we actually found a burial that looked very similar. I think there was a place called Malta, which is the place, not the island, in the Mediterranean. And in case you had to say, so in the Malta burial, it had a very similar state, where a deliberate pit was made, a child was placed in a particular way with goods. And when some DNA testing was then done, it was found out that these children had the same ancestry. They weren't related like cousins or anything, but the group from Siberia had migrated, their descendants had migrated into the Americas.
So there's like haplog, is that the word, or something, traits?
Yeah, you got haplogroups and things like that. But we can definitely tell they were certainly descendants of the Malta burial buried the Anzik burial. And there's a couple of burials like that were found in the States. So that, in effect, allows us to realise that, yes, we have some genetic evidence that people went from Siberia into Americas.
Well, I want to distinguish one thing here, because this is much more direct evidence, and I'm guessing time-wise it is from one of sort of the famous popular hypotheses, which has been widely debunked, but that is the Clovis arrows and the Solutrean arrows from like Gaulish, Celtic or maybe pre-Celtic Britain and France, which I guess they all have like sort of fluting or Corinthians at the end of their arrows. And so, I guess people decided, hey, since they both do that, then the Clovis people, the people who were in New Mexico, and obviously they didn't just teleport to New Mexico. It probably took them hundreds of years, if not longer, to get from, Alaska to New Mexico. They came from Europe, which of course at that point the Europeans would have probably been mostly Neanderthal and probably to the dismay of the original hypothesizers, probably entirely black at that point, or at least very dark skinned.
Absolutely, yes.
But
anybody older than 30,000 years old is almost certainly dark skinned too.
But the fluting of the arrows was different. So it's just like anyone who's ever been fishing or even took archery knows that if you have little edges on your arrows or on your fishing hook, it's more likely to stay in the animal and cause more damage. It's not necessarily a unique style. I guess that's called divergence, or whatever the case. In any event, this is not that. This is more academic based. It's not, hey, the arrows both have sort of like Corinthian ends on it and they're the same people.
Yes, you've got genetic evidence, archaeological evidence, and in effect some sort of ritual mythic, mythological evidence is probably going on at the same time. So that made us feel quite good, that these things are happening. So there's some evidence there for people who don't think that happened. Now, what is interesting is that when we actually study the myths we see in the First Nation American tribes and all through the Americas, we find that there are 4 distinct sets of mythical groupings going in, which gives us the conclusion in terms of studying linguistics that there were 4 migrations as part of the 25,000 to 14,000 year period of people going from Siberia and Asia into the Americas. So we could tell from stories there were 4 migration paths, and I believe it took DNA analysts far longer to realise that than it took us just by looking at the stories, which is really quite amazing, really. That there's the strength of actually understanding stories and their ancestry can actually predict what the genetics are going to be.
Right. The humanities, there's a podcast called Ologies by Ali Ward, and I don't know why I'm giving the promotion, but it's very good, and it's 1,000 times more successful than mine. But the humanities have ologies at the end of them too. I mean, so I think I know you're right. The following the stories and the language often precedes the science. And while I'm sure mistakes can be made, it seems to have a pretty statistically high rate of success. Anyway, it's nice to have sort of all of it sort of lining up on the same page, because that's
just creating some good foundations. Because just for me to say, Jeff, this story is 25,000 years old, doesn't really, that's just me saying it. So I'm just saying that here's some evidence to say all the things I'm about to tell you have some statistical probability of happening.
Right, until we meet the first vampire, well, we won't actually know what happened 25,000 years ago, and we're also assuming that they speak English and in the underworld Dracula type of vampire, as opposed to mindless revenants.
So we have this, and then so if we look at the map of the Americas, North and South, we find that at the very tip of South America, we find traces of the very first myths that would have travelled there. Then up to the top of South America is the second generation. Then bottom of North America to the east, we find the third generation, and then northwest, the fourth generation of myths. So in effect, it just makes sense that people just naturally pushed down as more people came in.
It is kind of, though, interesting, though, that the stories come in that order, or maybe the stories didn't come in that order, but just figured out that they're oldest following that natural migration. I've made the mistake of just following natural migration patterns and things. I like to say, are we sure that Greece preceded Anatolia? Did Anatolia precede Greece? It makes more sense that Anatolia would be first. And, most serious people say, no. Greece, preceded the Anatolian, the Greek, the Hellenistic Anatolian culture. I don't know. We'll see.
It's more complicated in Europe because it was all joined. Everybody was, moving all the time. We only had a short time period to get into the Americas. And because you're going from a larger group in Siberia and Asia, there's chances are more societal development and cultural evolution coming across then into the Americas, giving that grouping an advantage, and so pushing out the existing groups. So, and we see that quite a lot. And that really is the story of humankind, which is that so we now currently believe that whilst humans have always been, modern humans have been leaving Africa for at least 200,000 years, they actually didn't settle permanently until we had this 55,000 year ago migration. And those humans weren't genetically different. They were almost certainly culturally different. They had a cultural evolution that allowed them to survive better than any other hominid or hominin in Eurasia. They just, when they went there, wiped everybody out, pretty much. Yeah, and they persisted. And just as a matter of how fast they travelled, it is now believed, or there's certainly strong evidence to suggest that there's a group of humans who left Africa 55,000 years ago, whilst they initially stopped in the Saudi Peninsula, almost certainly to breed with Neanderthals one time, those people that would become the First Nation Australians literally probably walked out within 100 years.
Wow. It's funny you said one time. It's like, yeah, we ain't doing that again.
well, we did do it again. So that's why. So the First Nation Australians have Neanderthal DNA in them related to one significant admixture result, but the rest of the world above sub-Saharan Africa, so Eurasia, we have multiple Neanderthal migrations. So it's like the ones that went to Australia, went there, had a party with the Neanderthals and went straight to Australia. We stayed around a bit, had a bit more partying, and then went on our way.
Right.
So that's it. But again, there's good genetics to suggest that. I also want to suggest that humans travelled, that was de facto, and they travelled quite fast.
Side question. Do we have any idea what made this particular group of people so driven and they, in 100 years, they made their way from the Arabian Peninsula all the way to Australia. You have to, even over 100 years, you have to go at a pretty frenetic pace. Like, I don't know if they were driven because they internally are just the wanderers and then movers and fastest, or if they were like maybe not so strong and they were being chased away. I
think they just walked. They were used to walking, and it was all new land. And who knows what this one group thought? They made again. They may have had a generation on the Saudi Peninsula, and then we think, we don't like this mixing with Neanderthals. Maybe let's get as far away as possible. Let's keep walking. And just follow the coast, and 100 years, or maybe even 50 years, maybe 200 years, but certainly they could have easily got walked to Australia within 50 years. And but because of the earliest datings in Australia of around 55,000 years ago. And we know, and our dating of leaving Africa is about 55,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They were not hanging around. It was like,
I can only imagine how someone like you feel. This is like your life's work. But like, you sort of wish you had like the H.G. Wells time machine like chair, and you could sort of observe these things from above and just like watch it. Sure, with the fast forward button, but
it's a long time, 55,000 years to watch things.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. But absolutely, yeah. But again, it's just to show that humans, certainly before we had sedentary behaviour, which is around 15,000 years ago. We built villages and stayed in particular places for long periods of time. We moved a lot, and we moved regularly, just so people know. So there was lots of moving around. So for people to say, before 15,000 years ago, there were these particular tribes or groups. They were probably very broad and covered thousands of miles, rather than you could say there's this one group in a 5-mile radius and they were static. It was just everybody was mixing or fighting and killing. That was it.
And clearly, some people stayed because some people, there's still a continent called Africa. There's a lot of people. I'm sure they could have left and come back, but also Africa's a climate. Yeah, you can also move around Africa. It's a really, really big place.
There is more diversity in Africa than there is in the rest of the world. So you could take someone from Australia and someone from Scotland, and they'd be more closely genetically related than someone in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe 100 miles away from another person.
Yeah, the host of the History of Africa on one of he was on the show like 4 times. I'm not sure if he does that podcast anymore, which is a shame. It was really good. But on the first show he came on, he said that there's more diversity. I can't remember if we said West Africa or East Africa right now than there is in the rest of the world combined.
Absolutely. It is. They are moving around. Yeah, absolutely. So humans do that. What we do is a very different way humans behave than we did.
So
50,000 years ago.
So we have very, very motivated coast huggers that went all the way to Australia. Clearly, they skipped Siberia. We have other people who maybe they were hugging coast, but maybe more like the Black Sea, which was much bigger than the Caspian Sea, which was maybe part of the Black Sea. And I don't know, at some point they're like, whoa, look at all those mastodons. We could eat those for a long time, I'm trying to segue us back to the topic that I've probably driven us off of.
Let's go back to the stories. What stories do we know? So we know we went to Americas. We know we moved around, and we know there were 4 dispersals from Siberia and Asia when there was the last glacial maximum. So the end of the Ice Age, as we would call it, and then there was one more about 5,000 years ago, the Vineyards. So we have different sets of stories, and then we have the colonists coming over from Europe 500 years ago, and spreading their whole another set of myths.
Right.
So when we're looking at myths, we have to try and work out where do they come from? Are they from another place? And if they are, which set of people brought them in? So I just want to put that out there. These are all the things we have to consider when doing the work we do. So perhaps the most famous of all the stories, I would say, the one that's probably been researched the most, is what we call the Orpheus myth. So the Orpheus myth is where Orpheus, who was a very talented musician, lost his wife to a snake bite. There's multiple versions of the story, but I'll tell you sort of one. And he goes to the underworld, plays a little tune on his lyre to get a ferryman to take him across the Styx, goes down to Hades and basically says, "Can I have my wife back?" Plays a little tune or whatever, and Hades goes, "Oh, you're a nice bloke. You can, but she will follow you out, but don't look back. If you look back, you will not. She'll be sucked into the underworld for the rest of her, but you can't say life."
Well, this sounds very Loddish, doesn't it?
It sounds, to be honest, more like a native or First Nation American story.
Okay,
which is literally, we see this, and there's multiple versions of this, and we see it East Coast and West Coast. And we know that there is some linguistic similarity. There was a split early on when First Nation Americans came in, probably on the second wave. They split into 2 groups, and so they've got similar linguistic roots that went their own ways in terms of story development, but they both have this story.
Well, we obviously have to change it from the Orpheus name, because Orpheus implies, Greece like 2,500 years ago or whatever, 3,500 years ago.
Exactly. My enunciation of First Nation American language is not great, so I'm not even going to try. But the story is very similar, where the main one we hear a lot is a man loses his wife, and he waits by her grave, and she then goes off to the other world, and he tries to follow her, and then he gets to the river, and he can't cross the river, so he uses a special amulet or talisman to get an eagle to carry him across. And then he meets the head or the chief of the other world and says he wants his wife back, and the chief gives him basically a task to stay awake for a day, and if he can stay awake, he can take his wife home. And whilst he's there, he's fed and drink, and like any good man who has good food and good drink, he'll fall asleep. Sure. And so he did 3 times in a row. Didn't get his wife back, and he was sad. And there's sort of lots of narrative about how they say goodbye to each other. He goes back to the real world, and then he dies from a snake bite. So so that, and when we look at all the different versions of that story in America and the ones we have in Eurasia, they cannot have been developed independently. There are just so many things that are similar. The mythemes, so many mythemes that, which are small parts of stories that correlate. That the most probable reason the First Nation Americans tell the story is that it has come as part of that migration. If it's come from that migration, that's got to be at least, let's say, probably 20,000 years old.
I'm struggling right now to think, what is the moral? Is that a happy ending? They're back together? Is that a don't tempt fate, be careful what you ask for? Is that a life is cool? Is this like the first dark comedy? I mean, I don't.
Once you're dead, you're dead.
Once you're dead, you're dead. But he got to join her because he got to be dead too. So I mean, it's
well, that depends on how many underworlds and other worlds you have.
Ooh. All right, that's okay. Well,
it's that, depending on what culture you live in, who knows? That's a whole different podcast.
See, folks, I'm outranked here. I'm out of my depth. I'm out of my gravity.
So that was the one that I work and have many friends who study folklore, and many of them I would consider as classic folklorists, that they analyse the literature rather than look at my voodoo and witchcraft ways of doing things, which is computational comparative mythology. So if they rather look at the words and convert them into numbers and do some maths. And I get that. And even they believe that those stories migrated. So they're the cynics because they consider I have overreach at times in terms of what I suggest.
Well, I'm sure, and I'm sure you just feel that you're ahead of the curve because you've been following the oral tradition, and that the genetic tradition or the genetic information will come out later as we stumble upon or purposely find bodies. I don't know how else to say it. Remains.
Yeah, I've heard you. Genetic sex. So that's the big one. That's the opener. So we know there's a story. And we say 20,000 years. That's when those people arrived in the Americas.
And these are Homo sapiens.
Definitely, yes, absolutely. There's no Neanderthals in the Americas, as far as I'm
aware. And they're maybe they've intermixed with Denisovans, maybe not. Whatever.
There would probably be a little bit of that in some of those. Some of them are Siberians, some of them are Asians. So they're different.
Right.
Ancestry.
And like ghost populations, but whatever they were, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that these are all Homo sapiens with just slight differences, probably for climate, rather than them being like a race of giants, a race of elves, a race of ogres.
Yes,
it's not Middle Earth.
There's no weird stuff. Homo sapiens are Homo sapiens. The genetics only allow us to trace if they're related. In my view, I have no real care of whatever culture you're from. That doesn't matter so much. Do
we have a name for this particular culture? I mean, I know that people have used
the one that went over.
I guess the one that that before they went over. If it's the same short, right?
But the key tradition is the Chukchi.
Chukchi. Okay.
Okay. Spelled as it sounds, CHUKCHI. And we see, so they go and become First Nation, but we also actually see the Chukchi in Siberia have another story which is pretty well known, called the Cosmic Hunt.
Uh-huh.
The story I pronounce very carefully on American podcasts.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Sometimes you have to go the wild hunt.
Yes, the wild hunt. Yeah, so that's a very different story though. So it's the Cosmic Hunt. So this is a story where in the stars are used as like a mnemonic to tell a story of a hunt. And what we see is that exactly the same stars are used in Europe and Central Asia, and East Asia, and the Americas. And that, again, suggests that that story went over into the Americas at the last glacial maximum when the Beringia was there, making it again maybe a 20k-year-old story.
Out of curiosity, are these stars, is it all related? Is like maybe these stories, that mnemonic, is that what might have led to the zodiac?
It may have led to the constellations. So we have no evidence that the constellations being used, if they were used 20,000 years ago, are the ones that were used by Mesopotamia or Egypt. I think Egypt and Mesopotamia had different constellations anyway. Mesopotamian ones, I think, that persisted to a degree. Not all of them, and some were changed. And then Persia came along with a lot of doing the Greek style, a lot of Persian, Mesopotamian stuff. And, So I don't know. But the stars they used predominantly were that of Ursa Major, so the Big Dipper, the Plough. And they use same stars in all these stories across these thousands of miles to explain different characters in that story. Now, that is so literally impossible to have come up independently as well. Because you can't explain two groups of people 10,000 miles away using the same stars in the sky, it's in exactly the same order, the same class, because they didn't have constellations.
Is this starts with Orion and going after like the Pleiades, or like sort of the Eye of the Bear or whatever?
There are flavours of the stories that use the Pleiades, that used Orion and Betelgeuse. They're more in Asia and Indonesia and in the islands. You do see it, maybe elsewhere, but predominantly it is the Big Dipper.
Yeah.
And the North Star.
Yeah, honestly, those are the only stars that I can tell are constellations. Orion is the only one with the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, then pointing to the North Star. Those are the only ones that I've ever been able to consistently recognize. So it makes, just from, uneducated eyes, it makes sense.
So that's literally we think it's literally impossible for them to come up with that independently. So that must have travelled. Now, what is interesting about that story, I don't know if we talked about this before in previous podcasts, is that the story goes that people are hunting an animal, and one has a spear, one has a pet dog or some pots and pans, and they're chasing this animal, and they do chase them throughout the year, and at the end of the year, the animal dies or hides. And in sort of European stories, it's a deer or a stag or similar that is seen to sort of lie on the ground. When we get to Siberia, the story is a mammoth that hides in water, which again hints at the age of that. And then as we go into Canada, we go back to moose or whatever. So and say they hide on lie on the ground.
Caribou.
And
something.
What's interesting about that is that the Big Dipper, even if up north, doesn't actually go to the horizon, which would make sense if the story was there. But if we turn the clock back 30,000 years, and Earth's tilt is slightly different, you find that the Big Dipper, the Earth's major, did actually touch the horizon back then. Which takes the story back another 10,000 years, maybe more. On that, so absolute, so if you add this with all the evidence together, we know it's really hard to argue that there wasn't a migration into Americas earlier than 25,000 years ago. There always has to have been. There's no other easier explanation for it. So they're really the big ones, but we do see other. Well, actually, more than a cosmic hunt, we see that the Inuit, which migrate 5,000 years, also take a version of the story over into Canada. So the First Nation American tribes have a cosmic hunt story that is slightly different to the Inuit one. So this is how we can see that there's splits in migrations and linguistics as we go into the Americas. Where else we go? The other probably really interesting one is the creation myth. The creation of the world. How does that happen? And again, we see a story that is very old, and I would like to say this is probably a story that was taken with the very first people into the Americas. And I'll explain why that is in a minute. But this is the story we call the Earth Diver. So the Earth Diver is a creation myth where the world starts off as being all water, so a complete sea, a primordial sea, and there is a water creature usually on the surface of the water. It's a bird, tends to be a bird in Europe and Asia. It can be sort of a beaver or sea otters in the Americas. The creature dives down to the bottom of the sea and brings mud back up to the surface, and that mud turns into land, and then through various mechanisms, waves appear and waves create wind and blows things around, and the tree grows and the tree pushes the sky away from the sea, and the world becomes created. And let's say we clearly see that story as well. It's all across Eurasia, again, and into the Americas. But what is interesting is that the Earth Diver story changes around 30,000 years ago in Asia, and it turns into a flood myth. And this is where all your flood myths come from. Well, not all of them, but this is probably the catalyst for flood myths that we now see persist today. Where rather than the world started off as water, the world is land and then gets flooded with water. And then the bird goes off to find dry land and comes back. And that the clearest story we have that similar to that is Noah's Ark, where Noah releases the bird. The bird flies off, gets land or gets a branch and brings it back. That is the Earth Diver myth transformed, evolving to be the flood myth. So if the Earth Diver myth had become a flood myth, any later or earlier, then the creation myth of the Earth Diver in the Americas would have probably been a flood myth.
Where does like the Turtle Island stuff, the turtle being the holy diver, or is that just regional?
That's First Nation American. There are hints of that in Asia as well. But I haven't seen any proof to suggest that there is migration. There's enough evidence to show a migration of the story. There's not enough examples of it to do that I'm aware of.
Does anyone use an alligator or a crocodile, or is it always sort of like a semi-friendly animal?
I think it's a friendly animal, a slow-moving, an animal on water. That's the important thing. In terms of, it sticks out where, I don't know, that's very interesting. I'll just have a quick.
Now, somebody once told me, and I don't remember who the somebody was. So I don't know if the somebody was somebody with the word professor before their name or not. But they said that, in some tribes, it's an orca, which of course is a dangerous animal, but not generally to humans.
Inuit.
Yeah, it might be. And I've had a few different folks with different levels of, expertise in these areas, whether they're native or studies or both. And I really wish I could remember, but I can't. There's only, I have the book Turtle Island by Professor Taylor Keane. He was on the show. I remember, I've seen images. I think we've all seen images of, turtles at the bottom, carrying the universe and the earth and everything, I have vague recollections of it from childhood. I can't say where I saw it, but it seems like that would be pretty old as well. But, the Native American First Nation, that is pretty old.
Yeah. So, but there are, it is in the First Nation Americans, but it is also in Asia. But I don't know if that's an Inuit thing, because you don't see those stories in South America at all, as far as I'm aware. So it came across as probably one of the latter stages of the first migration, slightly the early migrations, or it may have come across with the Inuit, and then may have filtered down towards the north. So that's an interesting one. But one I'm less familiar with. I know there's another one I hear quite a lot of is about tricksters. So tricksters are often considered archetypal, meaning that they're just a natural character that appears in stories wherever you are in the world. That's pretty true. Tricksters are a lot of places. So you can't necessarily say, did tricksters' stories travel from Siberia or Asia into the Americas? Because they probably would have been there anyway.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah, that's a really natural thought to have that. But I do know of a trickster, a creation myth, where the trickster turns into something that is eaten by the daughter of the chief, and so becomes a baby, and then gets his way of accessing the cosmos, the sun and the moon, which is stored in a box, as a baby, and then he lets them go. Nice to do nice to the chief. But that's how sunlight.
Well, that's a commitment to insinuation. I mean, if you're going to allow yourself to be eaten and then go through the canal, the birth canal, and go in a box. But okay, listen, if you're a trickster god, I guess you or spirit, you have to think on the macro level.
You do. So that's we do. Tricksters are tricksters for that reason, really.
Right. It's like in the MCU where they go to Thor. He's going to kill Loki, and Thor's, he's been dead before. John's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I'm obviously aware of some Marvel mythology. So they're the three big stories that, without doubt, prove, I would say, beyond reasonable doubt, that stories migrated. Now, there are other stories, lesser well known, that we believe have migrated, not necessarily because of how dispersed they are, so that's the only way we could tell, is because they're more localized, so they're more within the northwest of the Americas and sort of towards the edge of Siberia on the east. But they have very distinct plots. And because of that, and because of the reasonably localised region of, let's say, a few thousand miles, 2,000 miles of it, then we feel that there is migration going on, although not significant. And one of the most interesting ones is the talking excrement story, where someone comes along and finds something on the ground, and it tells them something interesting, and that allows them to sort of save the day or look for danger or whatever. And that,
am I going to call this episode shit talking?
That's what it is. It could be the origin of the term.
Yeah.
So that is it. That is in effect what's happening. It is the well, yes, it is where excrement talks and rules of danger. And we see that in Siberia and, say, northwest America. So that's an interesting little motif. I don't know where it comes from. Perhaps it's a hunting thing.
There's a logic to it. If it's like the tiger or the grizzly bear or the cannibalistic tribe that, well, created the scat, maybe they're warning you of don't go here. There's dragons about.
Now another strange one is where a woman, member of the tribe, marries a dog.
Of course.
And they have children.
Sure.
Like puppies.
Yeah.
Well, she has puppies, but
werewolves.
Puppies will eventually turn into humans and then become the ancestors of the tribe. And this is how the tribe started. So the tribe feels they're animalistic. They've got the spirit of wolves in them. That's sort of part of the story that their grandmother,
Clan of the Cave Dog,
generations ago, gave birth to puppies who turned into humans because she married a dog. But we see this again in Siberia and in the Americas, Northwest America.
Do you think this tracks at all or follows the sort of codependence, the domestication of wolves to dogs, with humans, and it's sort of more allegory than myth?
Good question. I feel dogs must have been part of the tribe at that point. There must have been some domestication of dogs at that point, and that helped influence the story.
That's good.
Because dogs could be considered human in behaviour. When you look at them and how they behave and look, and we chose dogs that made us feel like they had human looks, which is why dogs today, almost you think, oh, they're looking at me in a particular way, like I understand what they're looking at. No, we just bred dogs that looked like that because we like to look at them. It isn't that they realise they're looking human looking. We just chose dogs that have nice eyebrows and things like that. So yeah, I feel that is, the dog must have been domesticated at that point, or when that story's going, because there's a human element to the dog in a way. So perhaps that dog could have bred with a woman to create puppies that turned into human ancestors. You can understand that.
Yeah. Is there any chronological correspondence to sort of the opposite stories, like what we might call werewolves now, even though I think werewolves came much later?
The werewolves is all to do with the underworld and the use of the dog to take you to the underworld. So that's a very Persian, Iranian story, but it's Indo European as well, which is that when the fair man of the dead was sort of removed, like as Zoroastrianism came in Persia, they got rid of the fair man of the dead and had a bridge, the Sinbad Bridge, and then on Sinbad Bridge they eventually had a dog on there, and then the dog became important, and the dog became the guardian of the underworld, but also quite sacred, such that it was considered the animal that could take you to the underworld. And so for a dog to take you to the underworld, you left your dead body out and it ate the body, and obviously if it ate the body and it could go to the underworld, it would take you to the underworld, never needed your body. And the same with ravens or things like that, they became, that's why they're considered sort of these harbingers of death and doom, because they do these things. And there's even a ritual practice in some parts of India still where dogs are invited to the celebratory dinner, but the funeral dinner of the person who died. There's a place left at the table for a dog to sit and eat. Yeah, so thank you. And in Ireland, the dog was considered that it would take you to hell, not heaven. So when someone died, the moment they died, they had to put out dog food and dog water to try and distract the dogs from hell, from taking the body to hell. So they had time to read the rites, so they would go to heaven. That's a key part of human storytelling.
Indeed, my goodness.
But perhaps the last big story I'll tell you, the one that really fascinates me personally, because I studied Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse mythology when I started my journey. One of the most interesting stories in Old Norse for me was that of Vlund, Wayland the Smithy, who was a magical armourer, who was an elf, and he's a blacksmith, can make this magical stuff, and he went through a traumatic time, which I won't explain here because I think we've done enough weird stuff going on with puppies and excretia. But the start of his story, he sees a Valkyrie, which is like a sort of warrior woman that could fly and goes to heavens. And he and his brothers, three of them, bathing, and they took off, and they were wearing swan suits. So they took off these swan suits, went bathing, and each of the brothers stole the swan suit. And the Valkyries came out and said, "We're our suits." And they said, "We got them. You can have them back if you marry us."
Sure.
That's how they married them.
Right.
But there's actually a Sky Maiden story in the First Nation Americans that has a very similar story, that women wearing a bird suit bathe, and they steal bird suits and force the ladies to marry them.
And up until about 30 years ago, young teenagers everywhere were stealing the bathing suits of the opposite sex. I mean, now it's a crime, but that back then it was just.
I think it's always probably been a crime, to be honest, Jeff. But it's just society looked at it in a different way.
I think you're probably right. I think that maybe the act that came afterwards, or lack of acts that came afterwards, was the distinction between whether tomfoolery or hijinks, or whether law enforcement had to get involved. But yeah, probably the less said about that, the better. Yes, our Overton window has definitely moved a little bit. So that's definitely the case.
So again, it's such a precise thing in there, and that story. Whilst I know the Old Norse story very well, that story is very similar to it. Exists in Siberia and in the Americas.
Can I ask a question that maybe you have the answer to? But this is actually, I mean, were they polygamous? So I know the Vikings pretty much were, they could have as many wives as they wanted.
By they, who are they?
I'm talking about the Native American counterparts.
I'm almost certain that if you ask any well-regarded male if he would like to have multiple wives, he would probably say yes.
Back then. Yes.
Well, even now, he probably would have said yes. But,
life's expensive.
They didn't have lawyers back then, so things were a bit different.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't know enough about First Nation American mythology.
I just figured like leaping right into marriage seems to be something that is either you got to be desperate or polygamous, because even if it doesn't work out, you're just there to spread your seed and then have more kids.
Don't forget, cultures change so much. We often assume everybody's culture's like ours today, when it wasn't. Back even 500 years ago, if a man asked a woman to marry her, normally 99 times out of 100, she would say yes, because her role in life was to be married and looked after.
Right.
And in return, she.
And there's still arranged marriages. I mean, it's yes.
Yeah, and that's it. So it was like that's the way it was. So you don't hear about extramarital things going on in the older myths. We only hear about the standard ritual stuff. Although, I'd be very surprised if, out of marriage.
Hera Hera never seemed to be particularly pleased with Zeus's dalliances, but she never quite stopped him.
Exactly. So leaders do that. Look at the Mongols and Genghis Khan.
Yes, I know Alexander had like 4 or 5 wives before all was said and done, and and it's not even clear that he particularly liked women.
So exactly, it's a very different world than the social relationships, and that's why some of them having a repository of myth is really important for social sciences.
It's also not lost upon me that this is a story. It's not a factual account of something that's happened. So, I was just wondering to see. I'm always looking for.
It's not historic,
right?
Absolutely, but let's say social scientists use this data, this narrative data, to try and make more sense of how people behave.
Right, and how they migrated. But I'm aware it's
enough data, which we do. We have quite a lot of data. You can feel confident in those results.
Yes, I do. I don't want the audience to think that I actually think it's a wedding ritual or the engagement ritual to steal bathing women's deer skins or bear loins or whatever the clothing was 30,000 years ago in Saskatchewan or wherever this was.
But what is interesting, actually, not very interesting, is if you go to a wedding, there's often the first dance. Well, that I think is a ritual as old as time. That is the mating dance of humans, in effect. Mm-hmm. This is our magical dance we do to make sure that you're going to get pregnant tonight. And that's but we've sort of calmed it down a bit now in the 21st century. So keep the clothes on and have a nice tune. But certainly a few thousand years ago, I'm pretty sure there was a lot more sweaty pregnant.
Yeah, I mean,
rhythmic.
Right.
It's fascinating. These things persist.
Even a couple of 100 years ago, in certain places, they carried the bride and groom up to a room, and they all watched and made sure they did it.
Absolutely.
And I just,
marriage, yes.
I mean, what a nightmare.
It's much a legal thing, I think, as it was a ritual.
Make sure it was consummated. Witnesses.
Yeah, make sure it's consummated, so you got the legal bound in there. Yeah.
Excellent. Just people we're just so weird. We're just so
DNA, isn't it? Because you can't say that's not your baby. Well, 46 people watched me make it, so it probably is. Yeah.
There's someone out there doing the dates and whatever, and since half the people died, there's probably like 6 people doing the dates and tracking everything. Oh my goodness, it's so practical. We're weird and practical and innovative and versatile at the same time. Thank you for this. I have a few side questions, which are sort of side quests they're between you and me that I will share with the world. Not that they're really quests of yours, but I know I shared with you like these videos of a guy named Dr. Richard Price or whatever, and he's talking to his student. I'm not sure if it's canned and fake. It seems a little bit like they're pretending to be Socrates and Plato playing out a script, but maybe it's real. And I don't know. I can watch him all day, mostly because he realizes he's being on the camera and he's constantly blowing his nose and not a care in the world. And but he clearly knows his stuff, whether it's right or not. I feel like you and he would have interesting conversations and interesting debates. Because at first I thought he was like really, really religious, but he's clearly not. He's clearly looking at things as a mythological perspective. So I don't know if you've even gone down that rabbit hole. I'm also wondering how you're doing on the Cain and Abel thing.
Yes, that's interesting. We've persisted this for some time, and so Cain and Abel for people who I don't know if people are going to listen to this, are they? If they are,
I hope so.
Cain and Abel thing is I didn't know you meant you were going to edit this out.
Oh, well, definitely not. No. Yeah.
Okay, so within Indo European mythology, we have sets of twins doing different things. We have twins of creation, and we have a divine set of twins who have certain characteristics. And Jeff asked me, are Cain and Abel related to the twins of the Indo European mythology? So they're certainly not creation myth twins. But are they related to divine myth twins? And the divine twins tended to have one more powerful than the other, because one was fathered by God and one tended to be fathered by a mortal. And you see that one is more warrior-like and one is more like a farmer. If you took it to the extreme, you really exaggerated the differences. And so when you look at Cain and Abel and pastoral versus agriculture, that makes you feel that, is that related? And I have to say, I'm sitting on the fence where my gut feel is that it isn't, but I don't know enough to probably be able to convince you it isn't.
That's okay.
I'm very interested in that and interested. So I had a chat with another podcast about a month ago, and they were asking me about Indo European myths in the Bible, and I said, what is interesting is if you take the first 4 chapters of Genesis and then remove all the myths we know that weren't created in the Near East, how much would you have left? It's not a lot.
That would be my guess. I mean, I'm not smart enough to know all that.
People think, the stories came from Mesopotamia, and many did, but they didn't originate in Mesopotamia.
Right.
We still have traces before then, all of them from the creation of the world to Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, from the snake and the loss of immortality to the floods. All of these are just very old human stories put together in a really nice canonical way.
I've had a guest on who was, yeshiva, Kabbalist, Talmudical, Orthodox, and he talks about all the stories as you would expect someone from that perspective to be, not just doctrinal and factual, but also happy. And I hear these stories, and I think half of them are horror stories. And I do not understand that. Abel had the sacrifice that God liked, the meat. Gods like meat. We know that all the gods always prefer. No one would ever sacrifice them. A melon. They wanted a cow, a pig, a boar, or something. And so Cain kills Abel. He's the pastoralist. He gets banished. Let's ignore for the moment he's person number 4 theoretically, but he goes to the land of Nod where the goat herders are and somehow is able to populate and found the first city and somewhere along the line there, I don't know where the Bible stops and other sort of myths that I've heard since diverge, so I'll leave that alone. But, he's given a mark which no one can touch him. So, so it's almost like God begrudgingly says, all right, fine, become farmers, but I still need the warriors, but, become farmers. It's just, the whole thing, I really think that you could do like a series of horror stories, based on, like, I want to make a dystopian science fiction show, like sort of like how many are, where the rich are high above and the poor live down below, almost like Brave New World, but like it's high, like Olympus, and they're so technical. Peter Thiel and Elon Musk they've achieved the singularity, and they're like transhumans, and the transhumans are the gods, and every now and then they get feisty and they create like demi-transhumans, like sort of cyborgs, like and you recreate the sort of the stories of the Bible in that, and that they are far enough away, or there's other like rings of fire or whatever that they keep the the unwashed masses away from New Olympus or whatever it is, and and you could just go on and just keep doing that, and you could have a never-ending series on Netflix. It's just, you need really, really clever writers that they have to be able to keep the themes there without causing like new crusades or fatwas, or having, maybe that would unify all the Abrahamic religions to
just the odd flood, kill everyone, not flood, or most people, and then start again in season 2.
Yeah, but the flood didn't even kill everyone. It's like all these like half giant the races managed to survive it. I mean, I still can't get past all powerful God, like sort of being incompetent at that murder. I know it's God's plan. I got it. It's God's.
That's the same God that planted the tree of knowledge and the tree of life in the Garden of Eden.
That's right. It's you live forever, but be ignorant. You know what? My ignorance is part of God's plan too. I get it. I am not to unravel this riddle. This Gordian knot is too tight for me. I understand, but I do have confidence that you and the people that come after you will figure it out, and hopefully I will figure it out by watching your videos and learning on the fly. And out of every one of my 8 questions, it will yield a response. That's a good question. So, and that's enough for me.
So they're interesting, because you come from a slightly different area of background than me, so it's I like hearing questions from sort of left field for me.
It's like I'm an intelligent baby. It's like I'm pretty smart, but like most of this is new to me on anything more than the surface level. And some is new to me even on a surface level. So I'm absorbing a lot of it and then trying to distill in my own way what's fact for fiction. And I'm trying to make things linear and make sense. And that's just not the way the world works over tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. But I still wanted to, and that's impossible. So some of the questions are going to be intelligent, but others are going to be like a 4-year-old is asking a question. But every now and then a 4-year-old asks a really poignant question.
Exactly, really, yes. Exactly. Yeah, some brilliant questions.
Right.
What I do know is that there probably a woman didn't ever marry a dog. And the thing found on the ground probably didn't talk.
Yes, so I think those are two
takeaways for today.
Well, I did see Weird Science, and the thing on the ground did talk, but he was converted to that by a magic computer-generated robot woman. So maybe a deep analysis of the metaphysics and esoteric notions of Weird Science is in order. The movie, that is, not the thing. Anyway, John, thank you once again for sharing your knowledge, taking the topic.
It's a pleasure. You haven't aged an hour since we've been talking.
That's right. We have an age now. It's been about an hour and 20 minutes. So, I don't know what will be next. I don't know if you'll have me next. I don't even know if I'll be doing the shit.
Always love our little chats. Let's say smart. We can talk about good stuff and good questions.
You're too kind. Thank you so much. So, John, tell everyone, fill in the blanks as to where they can find you and what you're doing and how they can support you.
I run a YouTube channel called Crecganford, Crecganford. If you can't find that, search for the Mythology Database on Google. That is my pride and joy, as it is for hundreds of universities and thousands of academics. But that's where I'm found, so you can email me through that. There's links to support me there, Patreon, my Patreon goes directly to helping further fund research on the mythology database and other things. So it's a worthwhile cause if you want to expand our knowledge of mythology and folklore.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. Folks, if you are here by accident or because you came here for the first time to follow Jon, welcome. This is the Garden of Thought podcast. Please subscribe. You'll find it on all audio platforms and occasionally on some others. I share some of them with the Sports Jedi Network. I share some of them with the Wrestling Super Friendos. Don't ask me to make that make sense, but I might just about give you enough in a second. So there's podcasts. A lot of them are like this. Some of them are like when I have a former member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Granted, that was sort of an exception, though I've had people in government or former governments, former undersecretary of the OMB. Not a big fan of Russ Vought, the architect of the Project 2025, and some others, including Mike Hilliard, a journalist, and Christoph Sanderson from the Eastern Border, and Mike's from the Red Line podcast, good stuff. And then my little guilty pleasures where my podcast partner is a pro wrestler. There's a little rotating core, but it's generally Mr. Thomas from MLW Wrestling. That's why it's called the Gospel of Thomas. It's called the Gospel of Thomas because my original host was PJ Black, who some of you may remember as Justin Gabriel when he was in WWE, and he called the show the Book of Black. And because I'm married to naming conventions, of course I had to call it the Gospel of Thomas instead of doing something wrestling so that people would know that it's involved in wrestling, so that wrestling fans would listen to it. Anyway, we talk to people in wrestling, but mostly about, well, stuff like this if we can, anything that's a non-wrestling interest, and so sort of unique context. So check that stuff out. Anyway, I'm on a bunch of stuff, but if you follow me on social media, you can follow me at IcarusFellMD or at Dose_Evil. Warning, the latter is mostly wrestling nonsense. Anyway, thanks for being here. I think the outro song, I've decided, I think it's going to be Holy Diver by Ronnie James Dio. This week talked a lot about the Noble Diver, anyway, thanks everyone for listening. See you next time. What do you normally say? You normally say tut tut and pip pip?
Toodle pip.
Toodle pip. Toodle pip, everyone.
Ride the tiger. You can see his stripes, but you know he's clean. Oh, don't you see what I mean? Gotta get away. Holy diver. That shiny diamonds, like the eyes of a cat in the black and blue. Something is coming for you. Look out! Race for the morning. You can hide in the sun till you see the light. Oh, we will pray it's alright. Gotta get away. Get away. Between the velvet lies, there's a truth that's hard as steel. Never-ending wheel. Say, holy diver, you're the star of the masquerade. No need to look so afraid. Jump, jump, jump on the tiger. You can feel his heart, but you know he's mean. Some like can never